Hey everyone, and welcome to our first National Quilter Circle live event of the new year. We're very excited. We have several new things that we're going to be announcing, including a new person who's joining us tonight to answer all of your quilting questions. The fabulous Gina Perkes is here. So thank you so much for being here, Gina.
Hey, thanks for having me, and
Of
hello,
course.
everybody.
All right, so if you're new to these live events, what's going to happen is for the next hour, Gina's going to be here to answer your quilting questions. If you have questions you want to submit live, you can do that by typing those into the comment section below this video. But also, if you're watching this at a later date, we're always available to answer questions through the website and through social media. So first off, just since you're new to us, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, sounds great. Um, so I've been quilting now for 20 years, and I now recently opened a quilting store here in Arizona. It's called the Copper Needle. I've been kind of all across the board with all the different areas of quilting. I'm a long arm quilter, so I've done quite a bit of professional long arm quilting as a business, then kind of progressed into competing. So that type of work, which was pretty cool. That helped build my resume and then kind of opened up some great teaching opportunities for me. So I've kind of had experience in all of the different areas of quilting, from owning a shop to quilting for other people to teaching and being on shows, and now this, which is really exciting for me to get to sort of combine all of those things, really. So getting to work as a designer for this project and then as a teacher to help everybody, and then hopefully that will kind of roll over into the quilting aspect.
Absolutely. All right. So also, if you don't know, we are launching the National Quilter Circle Quilt Block Challenge, and that actually starts tomorrow. And there is, yes, it's information on how to sign up for that on the Facebook page and on the website, and we can provide a link to with the description of this video. But Gina is hosting that, and she has designed the quilt that you will be making if you join us on this challenge. So will you tell us a little bit about the quilt that we'll be making?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a 9-week challenge. So I was supposed to design a quilt that had the 9 different blocks. And really, my goal was to create something where, from a teaching perspective, where the people doing the quilt would come away with a lot of new skills. So I designed it to be a progressive project where the first block that we're going to start with tomorrow will be the most simple block, and then it's going to kind of evolve into more advanced project or blocks. But then it all comes together in one cohesive piece of art, which is the quilt that I designed, and all of the blocks are star blocks. I think that star blocks lend themselves to all sorts of cool things, secondary designs, areas for neat quilting, a lot of movement, just all sorts of great things that go along with star blocks. So that that's where my kind of inspiration came from.
Perfect. All right, so we have some specific questions about that quilt that were pre-submitted to us, so we're going to start with those. And our first question here is from Jody. And so her question is about the Monochrome Fabrics list. She's a little confused by the background fabric versus the white and gray fabric, and she wants to know if you can take a finished block and show her where each the background, white, medium, and light gray fabrics are in the block.
Absolutely, I'd be more than happy to do that. I've noticed that there has been a little bit of confusion in the fabric requirements. But the monochromatic was just sort of a bonus for those people who maybe had a little bit more of a challenge coming up with that transition through the spectrum of all the colorways. So I just offered that sort of as a bonus to people who maybe just didn't want the full colorful option. So I did a I'm working on a pink version. Okay. And this one I have done using ombre fabric, which I do have a live video that's still available on the Facebook page, which you can always go back and access it, where I talk about in depth about how to use the ombre fabric, which is just a solid color fabric that goes from dark to light. And then you have 3 distinct shades, and then you also have some mid shades as well. So that works. I used a darker background for this particular project. So, okay. So there is the dark gray. Okay, that is the background. So the background is going to be seen in every block. And that's just kind of one of the primary fabrics that you'll have consistently. Each block, you'll also see little splashes of the gray and the white. Okay, so there's the white and a lighter gray. Really, those could be listed under colors. So if you look at it more as those are part of your colors that you're using in the block, that might help you understand it a little bit better. In the full spectrum version, show you. Okay, so in this quilt, there's going to be a little bit less distinction between the gray and the background. So here's that gray, and the background's really just kind of a light white with a little bit of a gray kind of pattern to it. So it's a little bit less obvious where those the differences are. Here's white. So I think not all of the blocks, but most of the blocks are going to have little splashes of the white and gray along with the background. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. So then just a little question. If you have the white and gray and your backgrounds were dark gray and then a white, what would be maybe another background color? Like maybe if somebody is getting confused because there's so many whites and grays, what would be another background color?
So I'd recommend neutrals because a neutral is going to help the colors to really pop. If you try to compete with another brightly colored background, you need those neutrals as a place for your eye to rest within the design. So if you have too much going on, that's really just overstimulation. So those neutrals are really going to provide that place for your eye to rest and just kind of create that calm that you need. So you can always use brown, a brown family, and then maybe just do that same type of thing where you're using kind of a lighter color for your background, and then maybe just a real light tan, and then maybe a medium brown for that. Instead of the gray and white, you could use tan. If you wanted to use black as your background color, and then maybe charcoal and then gray or something like that would look really good. If you wanted the colors to really pop, that would work well. But I do recommend the neutrals, and even something like an off-white or a taupe. Those are nice colors to give that place for your eye to rest.
Perfect. All right, well, we're going to move on with some more questions here, but just if anybody is watching and they think of a question, feel free to ask that. Again, just type that into the comment section below the video, and she will work her way through answering those. So since we're talking about fabric and colors selection and all that, we're going to kind of veer off to another one here. Someone posted this on our Facebook page that they have never quilted before. They went to a fabric store for the first time, became overwhelmed with all the different fabric choices, and ended up leaving with nothing. So do you have any tips for sort of first-time fabric buyers, how to sift through all the options, not get overwhelmed by everything?
Absolutely. So we've all been there. We've all had our first visit to the shop where you're just, oh my gosh, overstimulation. So yeah, what I always say is just go to what you like first. A lot of times it can be a little bit tricky when you have a specific project in mind where, oh, I've got to pick, oh my goodness, I have to pick 12 colors, and oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming. Well, why don't you start out with just go to something that you tend to migrate towards. Like we all have a certain color or maybe a certain pattern that we tend to migrate towards. So first and foremost, you just find what you like, and then something that just speaks to you. So walk through the aisles until you find something that grabs your attention, and that's going to be the best project to start with, is something that you like. Even if you're making a quilt as a gift, if I make a quilt as a gift for somebody, I usually make what I like because then it just kind of has more of my heart in it, and get what they get.
And then you might just end up keeping it and not giving it as a gift if you like it so much.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess that's sort of a follow-up question too. So when you're picking, like you mentioned, there's 12 different colors in the quilt design that you've done. Could you do the same color in every block rather than having so many different colors? Could you do that?
Yep. So I did give lots of options, and I will continue to do that. And that is just as a kind of a bonus in a way that the quilters can put their own unique spin on the quilt. I want the quilt to be very much about that quilter's journey. So if that quilter loves, a little bit of pink with a little bit of purple, great. With the monochromatic version, you can plug 3 different colors into that version. You don't have the 12 different fabrics. You're having much less in terms of fabric amount. And just because the challenge is starting tomorrow doesn't mean that you are going to be behind if you wait until the beginning of next week or even 3 weeks from now. You can catch up. The blocks don't take much time to complete. You can do one in a couple hours. So yeah, so but definitely you can use just 2 colors if you want to. If you want to use the 1 color, there's that monochromatic version available to you, and that's just different fabric requirements, which I will kind of help you a little bit through as we go. But really, you're just going to be plugging in the colors that you like in place of the ones that I use, and that's great. I hope to see all sorts of variations.
Perfect. That is one thing to point out too. Yes, the challenge starts tomorrow, but you can sign up for this challenge and start it at any time. Like even week 9, you can still sign up, and then all the past week blocks, everything, all that will still be available to you. So, if you get to week 4 and you're just having a great time and you invite a bunch of friends, they can still start it
Yep,
over and
absolutely.
catch right up.
And it's a great thing to kind of have little sewing nights. Get a group of friends together. Hey, we're going to make this block and make some cookies and hang out and have a great time. That's what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks, trying to get everybody to test these patterns. Hey, who wants to come over and
See, I
test
wish I lived a
patterns?
little closer. I could come do it.
Right? Yeah. And then another thing to mention is I mentioned it in my ombre discussion today, but why stop at just one? It's 1 block a week. Make 3 variations. Use up your stash fabric. You don't have to go buy anything new. Play. This is a good time to learn about value and color and things like that. So really, just use it as an opportunity. I mean, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. You can use up your stash. If you don't have a stash, then hey, get out there and go shopping. Have a good time.
So, okay, so there's 9 blocks in this quilt. What
Yes,
is the finished dimension of the quilt?
it's 66 inches square.
So if you made more blocks, could you potentially, rather than going 3 by 3, you could add and make it much bigger that way too?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to change the size of the quilt, you would just kind of get creative with it. You could the sashing that I have included in the pattern and the fabric requirements is 2 inches. That you could always add a bigger sashing in between. That's the fabric, kind of like a little inside border, if you will, that separates blocks. You could add a bigger sashing or add a double or a triple sashing, and that would extend the length and the width of your quilt. Bigger borders, but I've seen some really great pictures being posted on the Facebook page of last year's challenge, where they have really done some neat things with that quilt. I mean, they've expanded the quilt by adding. They might maybe some people have picked 1 block that they really really favored, and they added that in all of the corners, which made a bigger quilt. So there's all sorts of things you can do really to make it bigger if you want a bigger quilt.
Absolutely. All right, next question here. This is from Barbara, and she wants to know, do you pre-wash fabrics if you buy yardage?
Okay. Hi, Barbara. Yeah, I'm a pre-washer. The only time that I really don't pre-wash is if I'm using a jelly roll or charm pack with small kind of pre-cut, little kit type things, then I won't pre-wash. But if I'm buying yardage, I absolutely do. I've been burned too many times with fabrics bleeding as well as fabrics shrinking. And since I really do enjoy the quilting process and spend a lot of time trying to make my quilting look the way that I want it to look, I don't want the fabric to shrink around the stitching because then it really kind of covers up my design. So I like to take out all of the shrinkage and get rid of any excess dye. You can use, if you're using something that's notorious for bleeding, like a batik or a hand-dyed fabric, I usually will give it an extra rinse per cycle, as well as using a product called Synthropol in the wash. So the Synthropol is just essentially a soap that will help get rid of impurities. Retain is another product that you can use to help set the fabric dye. So if you add, and just follow the instructions on the bottle, if you add both of those to specifically hand dyes or batiks, those will help set all of that extra dye before you put it in your quilt. So it's a really worthwhile thing to do.
Perfect. Do you have any sort of techniques for when you are pre-washing fabric? I know some people like to baste their rodages together if they have like an agitator versus not in their washing machine, anything like that?
Right. So this is how crazy I am. I buy my appliances based on my love of quilting. So like most people think about laundry, I think about quilting. Um, so I have a top loading machine because the front loader just didn't put out enough water. And then the top loading machine I have doesn't agitate. So I don't really have that problem. Though you're always going to have all that extra thread. And so I kind of think the whole let's find the benefit to all this thread that we're getting, all the raveling that we have. So my grandma and I like to quilt together, and we do art quilts sometimes where she loves to save all of those little threads that come off of the ravel in the fabric. So basically I save those for her. We have a big baggie of all those raveling threads, and then they work perfectly to make really cool little thread painting, thread art. We've done like branches that look like there's moss and stuff hanging off it. So hey, you got to think of how can I use this to work for me?
See,
Little
there's no
awkward.
such thing as a scrap. You're keeping it all.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Donna, and she says, for this block challenge, do you recommend solids, prints, or a combination?
Hi, Donna. Okay, so for me personally, I love solids, and that is just going back to kind of my real. Well, I love all of quilting, but the machine quilting part of the process is really one of my favorite parts. So if I want my machine quilting to show up really well, I'm going to opt for solids or those that read as solids, like just a kind of tone on tone print or just a subtle print. Though I do think that prints would be really cool, and I've done some variations of the blocks, and I've kind of started to post some of them, but I think there was getting to be a little confusion. So I thought, oh, better hold off until it starts because people thought, oh, why does she have the block? Um, so yeah, so I'm not posting them yet, but starting tomorrow, I'll start to show you more variations of what you can do. So prints are awesome. I mean, absolutely. So I say yes to all. Yes to all solids. Yes to all prints. Yes to solids and prints.
Perfect. So yes to everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So you kind of just already answered this, but Carolyn wants to know when the first block comes out.
So it's tomorrow. Yay. So
Yes.
it'll be coming out tomorrow. You'll watch for it in your email as well as the Facebook page.
Yeah,
Instructions will be
absolutely.
on there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Carolyn, if you've signed up for the challenge by entering your email address to receive the newsletter, you'll get the newsletter, and there will be a link there that you can click that takes you to the first block. But it'll, like she said, will also be posted on the Facebook page as well. So you definitely won't be able to miss it. It'll be everywhere.
Yeah. And I'll
All right.
probably share it on my page as well. So everyone will share it.
Absolutely. It'll be easy to find.
Yeah.
All right, next one here. This is from Carol, and she wants to know how we could make it more modern. I have a hard time understanding the concept, and I'm wondering if this might be something to try with this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so if you want to kind of make the quilt design look more modern, there's a lot of different things that you could do. Number one would just be your fabric choices. So in the quilt that I showed us, the kind of primary quilt, I think it has a little bit more of a modern twist on it because of the fact that I used solid fabrics and the prints that I used. So for the background, there's just a very, very soft print to it, but it's very modern in style. So it's got kind of a little bit of gray working in there. Your fabric choices are absolutely going to be the key element to having it look more modern, as well as your setting. And I plan to, once we're all done completing our blocks, I plan to show you some different options for settings. There are already all sorts of different options that I've kind of played with. One option I think you'll really like, and it's going to show you how you can have a lot of background fabric to have more of a modern setting. And so those are some ways that you can do it.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Cheryl, and she says that she likes to make wall hangings. So is there a way that you can make wall hangings out of the quilt that you have designed?
Hi, Cheryl. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can certainly just use less blocks to create a wall hanging. It's 66 inches square. You could leave the sashing out and just connect and combine all of the blocks, or just do a really small sashing if you wanted to include all 9 blocks, and then you would be closer to 50 inches square, which is actually really could be a good wall hanging size. I mean, it's not tiny, so if you want it tiny, then maybe just use 4 blocks instead of all 9.
Perfect. Actually, was going to steal this idea because as soon as I read wall hangings, I was thinking about I'm going to make each block individually and then have, like spaced out all over the wall, like little
Oh
pictures
yeah,
almost.
yeah. You could even frame them.
Yeah. So that's what I
There's
was
a
going to
quilt.
ask.
Yep.
So
There's a quilt shop in the state where they just have like simple little blocks framed and hung in the bathroom, and it looks really cool.
nice. So if you're going to do that, would you still layer your quilt top with batting and backing and quilt it and even bind it? If you're going to make, a small wall hanging, how would you treat it as opposed to a full-size quilt?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could certainly still layer it with the batting and the backing because it's not quilted. It's not a quilt. You
Yeah,
have to
that's
have
very
the
true.
batting and the backing. Yeah. So yeah, I would say definitely still quilt it, and that way you're going to get that dimension that you're looking for. I mean, if you're framing it, it could look pretty cool without the quilting as well. And that's really just boils down to kind of personal preference. If you like the quilting process, then absolutely have a great time quilting it, and go through the process. If you're just going to do like 1 block or even 4, maybe you still want to add a border just to kind of give it a stop. That provides your eye with that kind of stopping point. So I'd suggest still adding a border, maybe some sashing around the blocks just to kind of keep them separate.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Vera, and she says, is this challenge for beginners? Which I am. I am so excited. This is my first challenge.
Yeah, I say heck yeah, absolutely. The project was designed for really all levels. And as a teacher, that's really something that I'm real passionate about, is just teaching people, and especially people who are brand new. I love that because if we don't have new people learning to quilt, then the art will just go away and die. So we don't want that to happen. And that's why I have it set up to where we're starting with the easiest block. And it's all step by step. So each pattern really has between 4 and 6 pages. So there's every step is really laid out for you. So even if you're new, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You cut off a point. We've all cut off a point, and my favorite words are "it'll quilt out." So yeah, absolutely. And we always have to start somewhere, and why not start with something that is full of great techniques to learn? Absolutely.
Yes, perfect. And of course, Gina will be here every step of the way too, with posting live videos, answering questions. And as we've even noticed on the Facebook page already, lots of other people participating in the challenge step in and answer questions too. So it's sort of everybody's helping to teach everybody. So even if you've never done a single stitch before. You're going to be just fine.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed that the group is just filled with people who are just so happy to help and encourage each other, which the quilting community is amazing. It's a great place to come and gain some new friendships as well as just learning tons from other quilters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Next one here. This is from Barbara, and she says, one last question. After washing, do you line dry and do you size or starch?
So line dry, no. I just throw it right in the dryer, toss it in there. And I don't let it dry all the way though. So I want to take the fabric out before it's completely dry. Otherwise, it's going to be wrinkled forever. So I take the fabrics out when they're still a bit damp, and then I start to press the fabric. I typically don't do much starching until I start the piecing process, but some people are different. You'll hear different opinions, and there's not really necessarily a correct way that you have to do it. There's just what works for you. So
Do you starch everything when you're quilting or just depending on the design?
it really depends. I do starch most of the pieces that I'm working with as I'm going. I try to avoid. I try to minimize the biased edges. So you'll see that I have different techniques that will kind of cut back on that. But if I do have a biased edge, which is the 45-degree angle of the fabric, where you have a little bit more stretch, then I'm definitely gonna use the starch. And I actually prefer starch over similar things like best press. I know that's a real popular one. The starch really keeps it at bay. All the stretching, it really keeps it down.
Do you use spray starch or the one that's the liquid that you have to mix up and then brush on?
I just use the spray starch.
Yeah.
Yeah, just good
Easier.
old saltless from Walmart. Nothing
Perfect.
fancy. Yeah, just spray it on and press it.
Perfect.
Good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Candy says, I want to use batiks. So what kind of background fabrics would you suggest?
Cool. So batik, I'm happy to mix batiks with regular fabrics for the background or even the solids like the gray and white. I would say just do exactly what you like. And that's another one of those things where there's no quilt police, there's no rules. It's just, hey, this is what I've done. The batik is going to have a different weave than the regular fabric, so it might feel a little bit different. But over the years, I combine them all the time. And again, just I would suggest doing something for your background that's going to be more of a neutral family so that your fun, amazing, bright colors that you choose will really stand out, and then your eye will have a place to rest. So those neutral colors do a great job of that.
Perfect. All right, our next one is a two-part question here, but Melissa says, what cutting tool brands do you use?
Cutting tool. So I use the Olfa rotary cutters. I'm pretty particular about making sure that my blade is sharp. So I'm one of these people who does tend to change my blade pretty frequently. So Olfa, the one that I use the most is okay. What is it called? It's the purple one. It's the most comfortable. I think it's called Glass. I'm here at my shop right now. Do I see it? I don't see it. Okay. Look for the purple one. It's good. And then what was the other part?
Well, I haven't asked it yet. The other part
Okay.
is, are there any size special rulers or cutting tools that might be useful for this project?
Yeah. I love there's a new ruler made by Quilter. It's called Quilter Select. And it's a ruler that has kind of a non-slip surface so it's not like you have to add a true grip or a piece of sandpaper. Just the whole ruler has it. And I almost can't even live without them. They're so good. I showed the one that I use quite a bit in this particular project is the 5-inch square. So in my first video, I accidentally said that it was a 4-inch square. So apologies, it was actually a 5-inch square, though a 4-inch square would work good too. And then I can't live without my 6x24. That's what I use for when I'm kind of cutting a project, I'll use that 6x24. And then probably something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 inches square. If you can stick with those Quilter Select rulers, I mean, you'll be a happy, happy person. So that's pretty much what I'm kind of sticking with these days, just because they're so awesome. You'll love them. Once you try them, you won't want to use anything else.
I say I do have a ruler that has a little bit of a grippy on the back, but I think it's a different brand. But I definitely I picked that one over my other one as well. Is there a size?
Right.
What size cutting mat do you need for this block specifically? That it's not an overly large block, right?
Nope, the block is 16 inches finished. So as long as you just have a block that's going to be, or a mat that will, accommodate that. So even just one of the smaller rotary mats would work. Yep. I mean, I recommend the 36x24 inch mat just for most kind of general quilters. I think it's a good size to stick with in your space.
Perfect. Well, not everyone has as glorious of a studio as you do behind you there.
It probably is a mess. The workroom is what's behind me.
Oh, well, all right. All right, our next question here, this is about quilting, but they want to know, what is the benefit of stitch in the ditch before doing all over quilting?
So a lot of benefit comes to doing that, and that is going to apply specifically to custom quilting. Stitching in the ditch is going to stabilize the 3 layers together, and that would be applicable to all machine types, whether you're using a long arm, a domestic, a sit-down long arm machine. It will hold those 3 layers together really nicely, and it will accentuate your piecing design better. I use the time where I'm stitching in the ditch to really listen to what the quilt's saying. People always say, "Oh, how do you quilt this?" Well, that's when you kind of listen to what the quilt wants in terms of design. So when I'm doing my stitch in the ditch work, that's when the designs will come to me. And I use a monofilament thread for that part of the process because inevitably I'm going to wobble out of the ditch, and determining what thread color to use can be tricky because oftentimes you have a light and you have a dark. And so if you use the light thread and you wobble out of the ditch and you kind of work over onto the dark fabric, then that'll create a bit of an eyesore. So monofilament thread is where it's at.
Absolutely. Perfect. All right, we're about halfway through. I just want to remind people that you can ask questions live if you have them. I know we're talking a lot about the challenge and specifics about that because we're very excited about it because it starts tomorrow. But if you do have a general quilting question, we can answer those as well. So talking a little bit more about quilting in terms of the challenge project, are you going to give recommendations on how to quilt this quilt once it's all pieced together and everything?
Yeah, I've got some really fun plans, everybody. So as I said, I'm actually working on, I think I've got 4 going right now. So I made the quilt to show you for the challenge, and then I made another one for the monochromatic version. But then I want to be working on a couple with you so that I can really kind of relate right then and there to questions that you might be asking. So that's giving me, I've quilted the first quilt, but that'll give me 3 or 4 more quilts that I'll be quilting. And my goal would be to have more than one option to show you. So sort of a comparative look at what the quilting adds or lends to the quilt itself. And then certainly I'll be doing more videos to show you kind of a block by block process of quilting. I develop machine quilting rulers, so I'll probably show how to use some of those tools in your quilting, as well as maybe what the quilt would look like with an all-over design, which is where you're just free motion kind of quilting all over the surface of the quilt. And that could work really well also. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of great potential in this quilt for some neat quilting. And my hope is that you'll want to try to quilt it yourself so that you can learn even more. I have another technique that I'm working on, and I think it will work out for me to kind of show that to you, where you quilt a block at a time. So it's not really a brand new technique. but I think it would lend itself really well to this project. And so for those of you who might be using small machines and want to quilt them without having to manage all the bulk of a big quilt, you can quilt it block by block, and I'll show you how to do that. So don't rush ahead and finish the quilt, even if you really, really want to. Just wait, because there'll be some neat things for you at the end.
Perfect.
You might just have to make another one.
Well, I mean, if you already have 4, like someone's gonna have to top you and make like 5 or something, you know?
Oh, completely.
All right, so this kind of goes along with what you're talking about, but Yvonne says she does not have a long arm machine, and so what would be the best way to quilt? Is that kind of what you're going to be showing also?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so you certainly do not have to have a long arm machine for the project. Uh, if you want a long arm, great. I mean, heck, they're fun. But no, you don't have to have one, even just a small sewing machine that you use for your basic piecing, even a Singer featherweight. A lot of people have those, just a very small basic machine. You can do some beautiful quilting with those. And then what I'm hoping to have ready to show you would be to quilt a block at a time so that you don't have to put the whole bulk of the quilt together into a big sandwich, which you'll have to manage. And that can be a little bit tricky with a smaller sewing machine. So with the kind of quilting as you go, so to speak, that will be much easier to do with the domestic sewing machine.
Absolutely. And if you plan to do the fun little idea where you're going to have all the individual blocks, then you can just do it that way too and quilt them one at a
Right,
time.
right,
So, yeah,
absolutely.
just a quick question here. Betty says, what size is the finished block?
So the finished block is 16 inches.
And then just to recap, what was the finished quilt size?
And the finished size of the quilt is 66. So it's got the 16-inch blocks, then the 2-inch sashing, and the border, I believe, is 5.5. Yeah.
Perfect.
So, I mean, if you wanted it to be a little bit bigger, then you could make your sashing bigger. You could make your border bigger. You could add additional borders to the quilt. So,
Perfect.
yeah, and those will be some things that I'll be teaching you as well as how to put on your borders correctly so that you don't have wavy borders. It's really going to be a lot to learn through this project. I think you'll be really happy. Be happy that you did it, I think.
Absolutely. All right, next question here. This is from Carol, and she says, do you stitch in the ditch over the entire quilt or just sections?
So the seams, you're gonna do most of the seams that are in the quilt. So let me see if I can show you. All right. So does this show up okay? Can you see
Yep.
this?
Oh, which part are you
All
trying
right.
to show?
Yeah. Okay. So all along here, I do stitching in the ditch. So everywhere there's a seam, I stitch in the ditch. Then you really have kind of a neat look on the back as well. I mean, look how cool the back looks. So
That
then you
is
can
really cool.
kind of see the design of your quilt on the back side as well. So yeah, so I do all the seams. If I have a lot going on in the block and there's just hundreds of half square triangles, I might not do. I might just kind of go around the edge of the triangles, but typically I'm going to do everywhere there's a seam. I'm gonna in that ditch.
Okay, and you said you use the monofilament thread to stitch in the ditch, but so on that one you just showed, what color of thread do you use for the rest of the quilting, and how do you decide what color of thread to use?
Right. So the monofilament is in the top for the stitch in the ditch work, but then in the bobbin I use a fine weight bobbin thread. So what you see here is a 60 weight polyester thread in the bobbin that will just be a neutral shade that will be matching or blending with the background fabric. So since my background fabric is kind of a white with a little bit of gray mixed in with it, I chose to use a white in the bobbin. And then for the other areas of the quilting, I used white to quilt it. Typically, a lighter color thread is going to be a lot easier on the eyes. It's going to have a softer appearance. If you have any mistakes or imperfections, it's not going to be as obvious as if you use a darker thread. So I always opt for a lighter shade of thread. So if I have a quilt that contains white gray and black, I'm probably going to opt for like a light gray. So something that kind of blends in but is leaning towards a lighter shade.
All right. Perfect. Our next question here, this is from Karen. It's kind of a multiple part question. So the first part is, why do ridges or bulges sometimes develop if you are using a heavy quilting design?
Okay, so that would be if maybe your quilting is not balanced. So you want to kind of do your quilting in different parts. So the first part should be to stabilize the quilt with your stitch in the ditch. Once you've done that, now the 3 layers aren't really going to shift, so you're not going to have that distortion. Then next, you plug in your motifs, if you will. So if you have a feathered design or a floral type design that you want to quilt in there, then you're going to plug those in. Lastly, you're going to plug in your filler designs, which is just the dense type of texture that you're typically going to use surrounding your motifs to make those kind of pop. Where you might get kind of bulging and sort of a kind of a wonky looking texture is going to be if you're using too dense of a filler design next to an area that doesn't have enough quilting on it, and that's just going to create kind of an unbalanced effect. So you can just either add more quilting or take out some quilting.
Okay, and then the next part here, do you always start in the center and work out to the edges?
No, I don't typically do that, but I do more work on the long arm than I do on a sit down machine. I think as long as you're stitching in the ditch, I think you're okay with starting kind of wherever you need to be. The quilts I've done on my smaller machine, I've just, as long as I'm stitching in the ditch, it doesn't really matter too much where I'm starting, as long as I'm going across the quilt and stabilizing it.
Okay, so since you are an expert with the long arm quilting, and we haven't had someone to talk about long arm quilting, sort of explain the process of how that works. I know you have to have extra backing fabric when you're loading it on a long arm. What are some other things that you have to do to use a long arm quilting machine?
Yeah, so a long arm quilting machine is going to be a machine that kind of rolls along on it rests on a carriage, which rolls on the track system. And for me, it was just really kind of a natural way to quilt because it was, as I started out quilting on a sit down machine, for me, that meant that I was moving my work, or if you use the paper pencil analogy, the paper is moving under the pencil. With a long arm machine, the pencil's kind of moving over the paper. So, and you can manage things like areas, imperfections, areas that you need to ease in because you're working right there from the front of the machine. You certainly do need to have more backing fabric because it rolls on a track. I'm sorry, a frame. So you have the 3 layers really attached to the leaders, is what they're called. So that's where you attach your fabrics to. So your backing fabric will attach both the top and the bottom. Then your batting is really just kind of free, and then your quilt top will go over that, and then either be attached to the top leader or basted down onto the quilt. Then that bottom edge of your quilt will also be attached to a leader. So really, if you have things like wavy borders or areas that need to be eased in, they're going to kind of stand out to you, which is kind of good because you can work them in. And I really enjoy it. But I also enjoy quilting on a sit down machine as well. So I think they're both great, and whatever space you have, whatever your budget is, then I think you just go with that. I like to live by the whole, it's not the violin, it's the violinist. So it's not what machine do you have, it's what are you doing, not what the machine's doing. So
Perfect. So if somebody is maybe in the market for a long arm machine, are there certain characteristics or things to look for in a machine, maybe certain features they have that are better than others?
yeah, absolutely. You want to first and foremost think about the space that you have. There's always options for people wanting to use a long arm machine. You can always start with something smaller, but it's still a long arm machine. I have a long arm in my shop that's only 5 feet wide, and then it sticks out about 5 feet. So you think about your space. You want to think about if you want stitch regulation or if you want automation, which is where the machine is computerized. So you can really start off basic and just have, maybe even something that you find on Craigslist, or there's other sites on the internet that you can go to if you want to kind of get started long arm quilting. For me, I actually started quilting right out of my garage and did that for many, many years. I do live in an area where the weather's pretty nice most of the time, though it does get a little bit hot. I'm in Arizona, not Phoenix though. So, but yeah, certainly there's a lot of great deals to be had out there if you want to get into long arm quilting. It's fun. I think you would be addicted. I know I am, and people I meet are addicted to it.
I'm wondering how I could convince my husband to allow me to turn our garage into a long arm quilting area. I don't think he'd go for it, but
yeah, dude, that's why I'm single.
perfect.
Maybe I should recommend it.
Well, just ask him nicely.
Yeah.
So if you start off with that smaller long arm, say that 5-foot one, does that limit the size of quilt that you can do, or can you just sort of move it or shimmy it along it? How does that work?
Yeah, so you could only do a quilt that was the width of your frame. So you could do a longer quilt. I mean, if you had a really long skinny quilt, you could do it. But with a 5-foot table, the maximum width you're going to get is probably 4.5 feet. So for people who like to do wall hangings or smaller pieces and just kind of want to get into it, it's an option. I mean, I really probably wouldn't recommend going that small, but it is available for people who do the smaller quilts.
Absolutely. All right. Catherine asks, I'm new to quilting. I have 30 weight machine quilting thread. Is this a good weight, or do I need the 60 weight thread?
For the, should she say for the bobbin?
She said for the quilting. So she has 30 weight machine quilting thread.
Okay. So a heavier thread, so 30 weight is going to be a much heavier weight than 60. That, to me, a heavier weight thread equals kind of more obvious imperfection. So it's going to highlight if you have really small stitches or big stitches. So if your stitch length isn't perfect, I don't really know what your level of machine quilting is, but if you're new to machine quilting, then I would suggest going with a finer weight just because it'll bury into your fabric better. I like a finer weight thread because I like how it buries into the fabric. 30 weight's a little heavy, but that's just in my opinion. And you'd also have to consider what type of quilting you're doing. So if you're wanting to do kind of modern, say you want to do vertical lines all the way across the quilt, then a heavyweight thread would really look nice. If you're wanting to do small stippling or little pebbles, then a 30 weight isn't going to be your best choice because it'll build up on itself.
So then is that something you have to think about, is how the thread is actually going to hold up in the quilt? So if you know you're going to give this to maybe a teenager who's going to use it a lot and wash it a lot, should you use a heavier thread then versus a lighter thread?
That's a great question. Yes. So if you're doing a quilt that's going to be a utility quilt, meaning that really its main purpose is to be used and loved and washed and have tea parties on it or whatever, dragged across the floor, then yeah, certainly a heavier weight thread is going to hold up a little bit better. I wouldn't rule out using, let's say, a 40 weight, which is kind of going to be in between. I mean, a 60 weight might be a bit fine for a utility quilt, but 30 could still be a little bit heavy. So 40 is kind of a nice happy medium.
Okay. And then when it comes to obviously different weights of thread, different thicknesses of thread, how do you know what needle to be using with which thread you're picking, or can you use the same one for all of them?
Yeah, so you're going to want to vary the size of your needle. That can be kind of your first line of defense if you're noticing that you're having breakage. So typically a heavier thread is going to need a bigger needle. And you can also go with a needle that's used for top stitching, embroidery, or metallic threads. And that means that it will oftentimes have a bigger eye where the thread goes through. So that can kind of cut back on the breakage that you might experience. I usually just find that I'll try to start with the smallest needle I can because it makes a smaller hole. It's just a little bit finer. Then if I start to have some breakage issues, I'll switch to a bigger needle. So typically in my studio, I'll keep about 4 different sizes of needles that I can have to kind of switch to. And that's another thing that I'm very particular about is changing my needles often. Keep a sharp needle in. Yeah.
See, you're good about that. I'm terrible about it. I wait until there's a problem and then I go, oh, I should probably use my needle. Same thing with the rotary cutter. I use that until the very last. It won't cut any more threads.
I just love it when it's just a nice sharp blade, like it's like a hot knife going through butter. It's so good. Yeah.
Okay, so then that's a question. I know some people are intimidated by rotary cutters because they are so sharp, and I mean you're going right by your fingers. So do you have any tips on sort of like safety when using a brand new rotary cutter blade?
Yeah, keep being fearful. I always want people to know the dangers of the rotary cutter. It's a very dangerous piece of equipment. It really, really is. I know people who cut their fingers off. I really do. So do be afraid. Do respect the rotary cutter. Even so, that's another thing I'm particular about. I'm not one of these people who's particular about a lot of things, but when I notice that somebody's working on a piecing project and they leave the blade open, it just drives me crazy because you could just reach for the cutter and then that blade is just exposed there. So be really careful about making sure that you're closing it and covering up that blade. And every time you cut, just watch what you're doing. So I don't typically have my fingers like really, really close to the edge of the ruler. I typically will have them about 3 inches over. And then I make sure that that blade goes down along the edge of the ruler before I even start to cut, because you could easily be looking somewhere else and have that blade like right across, your finger, and then you've only got 9, so that wouldn't be good.
Yeah, and it's not going to make quilting very fun. So then, if you're new to rotary cutting, would you recommend? I think you said your favorite ruler was 6 or 6.5 inches wide. I mean, I know the one I use is actually only 2.5 inches wide. So is ruler
I think
selection something?
I think that 6 by 24 is a really good one for people wanting to cut, because you can cut such a variety of things on projects, borders, binding. There are some other safety products out there that you can use, kind of like almost like a paper cutter, where you really aren't in any danger of cutting your finger. But I mean, I will say I have been quilting for 20 years, and knock on wood, I haven't really cut off a finger, an edge of a finger, or a nail, or anything like that. I've got everything. They're all mine. But I have held a rotary cutter and just kind of turned and let it skim across my hand, and I still have a big scar from that. So I do respect how sharp they are. And gotta be careful. Yeah, same thing with irons.
Yes. Okay. So speaking of irons, I have a follow-up question going back to our monofilament thread that we were talking about, because we have talked about this in past live events, and some people really like it, some people don't. It is sort of like a plasticky feel. Does it melt, or can it melt if you press your quilt or dry it maybe really hot in the dryer?
Yeah, that's definitely some concern that people have expressed to me, those students that I've recommended it to, because the type of monofilament that I recommend is nylon. So I don't recommend the polyester monofilament thread because it is very it's almost too heavy and too shiny for sure. With it being so shiny, it takes away the whole invisible quality of the thread. So I use the nylon. People always say, "Oh, which manufacturer?" So I know that YLI carries a nylon monofilament, as well as Orifil and Glide. So those are 3 that I know of that are really nice. And I've been working with it. I work with it in my applique as well as my quilting, my bindings. Even I've used it. So no, I absolutely will go back in and press after I've applique, and I have never found it to melt. I suppose if you just set your iron down and like went and took a bath or something, it might.
Well, yeah, and your fabric too.
Yeah, then everything would be burned down.
Well, so
So
that's the
no.
other concern that some people have with the monofilament thread, like just the one that I know that I've got it, like the big box store or your average craft store. It feels almost like, I'm gonna say, fishing line, like it has
Yes.
sort of a rough texture to it. So does this nylon one have that as well?
No, the nylon has I compare it to sort of hair. So that's what it feels like to me. It's like a piece of hair. I mean, you can wrap it around your finger and the thread will break, which is really what you want. You want that. You don't want that thread to be so strong that you have to worry about what will happen to the fibers of your fabric later. And that's again my opinion. So no, it doesn't have that same kind of fishing line feel that the polyester monofilaments have, and there have absolutely been so many improvements with the product over the years. So I'd say if you've tried it in the past and weren't really sure about it, give it another try. Try the nylon if you like it.
Can you use it in your bobbin?
Yeah, I mean you can. I haven't though because that 60 weight polyester works so nice with it. Um, I really haven't seen a need to do it. And typically I kind of like to see the quilting on the back because it highlights the design of my quilt top. So I haven't opted for that, but I don't think there's any reason you can't. I've read about people who've used it in the bobbin successfully. So I think it's something that you could definitely try.
Absolutely. All right, so we're coming up towards the end of the hour here. So just for anyone who's maybe just tuning in and missed the very beginning where we talked about the challenge, Gina, if you just want to say a little bit more about what the challenge is, when it starts, maybe show us a little bit of the quilt again to get people really excited about the fact that it starts tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a 9 week block challenge. It's free, so you don't have to pay anything to join. You just get to learn and have a great time in the quilting community, talking with other quilters, asking your questions, getting really neat positive feedback from each other, myself included. So I'll be chiming in as well. I'll be providing you with a lot of great live videos. So I've already provided 3 live videos that you can always go back and access on the Facebook page. Just kind of scroll back up through the feed and you'll be able to see my live video on pre-washing or not pre-washing fabric selection as well as ombre. But each week you're going to get a new block and you're going to just have a week to complete it. I'm hoping that you'll do 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, and that way you can kind of experiment. But it's really just a quilt designed to for many things, to have a great quilt in the end. I'll show you a little sneak peek also posted on the site. But there's 9 different star blocks, and it takes you through the full spectrum of color. But there's also a second colorway available that if you wanted to use just one color or even 2 or 3 and not so many colors, if you're overwhelmed, want to stick with simpler color choice, then that's absolutely fine too.
Perfect. Yes, we're very, very excited to start it. I'm definitely going to do this one as well. And so if you haven't signed up for this challenge, you can do that on either the Facebook page. There's a link that will take you to the website, and you just put your email address in and you'll get the newsletter, which will go out every Thursday. And that will have the link to each block. And then you can participate in the challenge and post your photos and chat with us on Facebook as well. So thank you again so much for being here tonight, Gina, to answer our quilting questions. And we look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
Yeah, and definitely post your pictures, everybody, because it's really neat to see what everybody's doing. It helps all of us. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, me too. I hope everyone has a great night.